This is the Richards family. On the outside, they were a portrait of love and success. Gianna Richard, a nurse who poured her heart into caring for others, became a beacon of hope for patients and colleagues alike. People who met her described her as someone who could brighten even the darkest days. Her husband, Ahmed Berry, was a federal agent, a man with a sharp mind and a promising career. Together, they seemed unstoppable, building a life that many would envy. Their daughter, Annabelle Lowe, was the heart of their home, a lively 4-year-old whose laughter could fill a room. But looks can be deceiving. Behind the laughter and the seemingly perfect smiles, cracks were beginning to form. Secrets were festering, and betrayal was waiting in the wings. This family, how could a life so idyllic end in chaos? How could a love so pure dissolve into betrayal, violence, and bloodshed? Tonight, we delve into the chilling story of the Richards family. A story of trust broken, love twisted, and lives shattered. It's a tale of infidelity, manipulation, and a crime that left a community stunned. So what led to this nightmare? What tore this family apart? Before we go into the details of the story, please note that this video contains true crime content, including themes of violence and betrayal, which some viewers may find distressing. While the events are based on a real case, some names and details have been altered to protect the privacy of those involved. This content is intended for educational and informational purposes, helping to explore the complexities of justice and human behavior. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Gianna Richard dedicated her life to helping others. As an ICU nurse, she became a lifeline for countless patients during the pandemic. While fear and uncertainty gripped the world, Gianna stood as a pillar of strength. She worked long hours, often sacrificing her own comfort to bring solace to those in need. "She saved my life. I'll never forget her kindness," says one survivor, recalling how Gianna not only cared for his medical needs but also helped him reconnect with his family after weeks in isolation. Her co-workers called her the Angel of the Ward, a nickname she earned through tireless effort and an unmatched ability to bring hope in the darkest moments. Beyond the walls of the hospital, Gianna was no different. Friends described her as nurturing and selfless, a woman who made everyone around her feel valued. At home, Gianna carried the same warmth. She was the glue that held her family together, pouring her energy into her husband and her young daughter. But as dedicated as she was, her compassion and kindness masked an unspoken truth. She carried the weight of her marriage alone, unaware of the storm brewing just out of sight. Ahmed Berry had always been seen as a man of discipline and integrity. As a federal agent with the IRS, he was well respected among his colleagues. His sharp mind and unwavering work ethic had earned him a reputation as someone who got the job done. After years of building their careers, Ahmed and Gianna made the move to Washington. They saw it as a fresh start, a chance to provide their daughter, Annabelle, with the stability and opportunities they never had. Ahmed, always the proud father, took every opportunity to show off his little girl. He would tell co-workers stories about her milestones and light up when he talked about her future. But beneath Ahmed's polished exterior, cracks were forming. The demands of his job, combined with the growing tension at home, were slowly taking a toll. Yet, he managed to maintain the appearance of a devoted husband and father, a man committed to his family. For all anyone knew, the Richards were thriving in their new life. Ahmed and Gianna seemed like the perfect team, but perfection is often an illusion. Beneath the surface of their picture-perfect life lay secrets, lies, and desires that would soon tear them apart. Annabelle Lowe was the heartbeat of the Richards household. A bright and spirited child, she had a knack for making even the most ordinary moments magical. For Gianna and Ahmed, she wasn't just their daughter, she was their world. She loved animals, made fast friends at preschool, and had a laugh that could melt the hardest of hearts. Her parents often joked that their little girl had them wrapped around her tiny fingers. Every decision they made seemed to revolve around giving Annabelle the best life possible. Balancing their demanding careers with raising a young child wasn't easy. Gianna worked grueling hours at the hospital, and Ahmed's job as a federal agent often required him to travel. While they juggled their roles as parents and professionals, cracks in their seemingly perfect life began to show. Tired nights turned into tense conversations, and the demands of parenting left little room for the couple to focus on each other. Their solution came in the form of a live-in nanny. They hoped that by bringing someone into their home, they could lighten the load and carve out more time for themselves. That's when they found Leona Villarreal, a 22-year-old Brazilian au pair eager to learn English and embrace life in the United States. Gianna was thrilled. Leona's background in childcare and her nursing studies back in Brazil seemed like the perfect fit. She thought she was bringing in someone who would complement their family's needs, a helping hand to ease their chaotic schedules. But what was supposed to be a solution to their challenges would soon become the catalyst for their undoing. Leona wasn't just stepping into the role of a caregiver. Unbeknownst to Gianna, she was stepping into a role that would change their lives forever. While Annabelle played happily in the backyard, her parents' relationship was quietly unraveling. And Leona Villarreal was about to find herself at the center of a web of secrets, betrayal, and tragedy. Leona Villarreal arrived in the United States with dreams as bright as her smile. At just 22 years old, she had left her small hometown in Brazil, eager to explore new opportunities, learn English, and build a brighter future. A recent nursing graduate, Leona had aspirations that mirrored Gianna's. A career in caregiving and a life defined by helping others. She believed joining the Richards family would be a perfect fit, blending her professional interests with her love for children. Gianna saw a bit of herself in Leona. She admired the young woman's ambition and eagerness to learn. When Leona arrived at their Washington home, Gianna welcomed her with open arms, hoping she would become not just an employee but an extension of their family. Ahmed was equally welcoming, treating Leona with kindness and respect, a gesture that seemed perfectly natural to everyone involved. Leona quickly adapted to her new role. She bonded effortlessly with Annabelle, who saw her as both a caregiver and a friend. Annabelle adored the time they spent together, playing games, reading stories, and exploring the nearby parks. For Gianna, it was a relief to see her daughter so happy. Leona's presence lightened the workload and allowed Gianna to focus more on her demanding job. For a while, the Richards family appeared to have found their rhythm. Leona seemed genuinely grateful for the opportunity. She spoke often of her family back in Brazil, sending pictures of her new life and excitedly sharing updates about her progress in English. To Gianna, Leona was a godsend, someone who brought balance to their busy lives. But as the months passed, subtle changes began to disrupt this harmony. Ahmed, once a doting husband, started spending more time at home than usual. His interactions with Leona, though seemingly innocent, began to extend beyond the professional boundaries of her role. Small moments, a lingering conversation, a shared laugh over an inside joke, didn't go unnoticed by Gianna. At first, Gianna brushed off her unease as overthinking. She convinced herself that Ahmed was simply being kind, a reflection of his naturally charismatic personality. But the signs became harder to ignore. Ahmed began adjusting his schedule, arriving home earlier or finding reasons to work from his home office. He started offering to drive Leona to run errands, something Gianna had typically done herself. Leona, for her part, remained professional, at least on the surface. She continued to care for Annabelle with unwavering attention and treated Gianna with respect. Yet, even she couldn't help but notice the growing attention from Ahmed. Her nervous smiles and awkward chuckles in response to his jokes didn't go unnoticed by Gianna, who began to feel like an outsider in her own home. Gianna's unease deepened when Ahmed's behavior toward her shifted. He became distant, offering curt responses to her questions and spending more time glued to his phone or computer. The warm, attentive husband she once knew seemed to be slipping away, and in his place was a man she barely recognized. Still, Gianna hesitated to confront him. What would she even say? Her suspicions felt fragile, resting on a foundation of gut feelings and fleeting moments. Though nothing overt had happened yet, the tension in the household was palpable. Gianna began to withdraw, spending late nights at the hospital and pouring herself into her work as a way to escape the discomfort at home. Ahmed, meanwhile, appeared unbothered, carrying on as if nothing had changed. But Gianna couldn't shake the feeling that her family was slipping through her fingers. And in the center of it all was Leona, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge, that she had become a source of quiet conflict. As the days turned into weeks, Gianna's growing discomfort became harder to ignore. She would catch glimpses of Ahmed and Leona exchanging smiles in the kitchen, or hear their muffled laughter from another room. Alone at night, Gianna would lie awake, replaying these moments in her mind, wondering if she was being paranoid, or if her instincts were warning her of something much darker. And so, the once happy home began to shift. The cracks in the foundation were widening, and the perfect life the Richards family had worked so hard to build was slowly beginning to crumble. Little did Gianna know, the storm brewing under her roof was far more destructive than she could ever imagine. At first, Ahmed Berry's interactions with Leona Villarreal seemed harmless, even friendly. Small talk over breakfast turned into longer, more personal conversations. Ahmed began asking about Leona's life in Brazil, her family, her dreams. To anyone watching, it looked like a boss taking an interest in an employee's well-being. But under the surface, something much deeper was brewing. What started as innocent gestures, helping Leona carry groceries or driving her to a language class, began to take on a new tone. Ahmed's casual compliments turned more personal. He told her she was beautiful, that she brought light into the house. Leona, flattered and perhaps naive, didn't push back. Soon, the boundaries between them started to blur. Text messages became their primary mode of communication when Gianna wasn't home. At first, it was logistical, coordinating Annabelle's schedule or discussing household matters. But the messages quickly took a different turn. Late-night texts about shared jokes turned into flirtations, and flirtations turned into confessions. Ahmed began opening up to Leona about his frustrations with Gianna, painting himself as a man misunderstood and unappreciated. Leona listened, sympathized, and eventually reciprocated. By the time their relationship turned physical, it was no longer just an affair. It was a partnership, a secret alliance built on mutual attraction and shared deception. Ahmed began orchestrating clandestine trips with Leona, using his work as an excuse. There were weekend trainings that conveniently coincided with Leona's days off. Hotels, out-of-town dinners, and even quiet moments stolen during errands became their refuge. Emails and encrypted messages revealed just how deep their connection had grown. Ahmed wrote to Leona about dreams of starting a new life together, one free from Gianna's shadow. Leona responded in kind, expressing both her fear of being discovered and her excitement about their future. They were no longer just hiding an affair. They were building a life in secret, one that Gianna could never be part of. At first, Gianna's suspicions felt more like nagging doubts. She noticed Ahmed's behavior changing. He was colder, more distant, and increasingly secretive. His phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, was now always in his pocket. He stayed up late, often claiming to be catching up on work, but the light from his phone screen told a different story. Gianna's unease grew when she saw how Ahmed and Leona interacted. Their shared laughter, the subtle glances exchanged when they thought she wasn't looking. It all added to her growing sense of dread. She tried to rationalize it. Leona was young, vibrant, and naturally warm. Ahmed was just being friendly, wasn't he? But late at night, as Gianna lay awake in bed, those thoughts consumed her. One night, Gianna decided to confront Ahmed. She asked him outright if there was anything going on. Ahmed, caught off guard, laughed it off. He accused her of being paranoid, overworked, and insecure. His response left Gianna feeling ashamed, as if she were the one at fault for even questioning him. Friends and colleagues began noticing a change in Gianna. At work, her usually cheerful demeanor had dimmed. She seemed distracted, withdrawn, and emotionally drained. One close friend recalled Gianna breaking down during a lunch break. She said she felt like she was losing her family, like the life she'd worked so hard to build was slipping through her hands. and she didn't know how to stop it. While Gianna struggled with her suspicions, Ahmed was leading a life she couldn't have imagined. Beyond his affair with Leona, Ahmed had begun exploring darker corners of the internet. He created profiles on fetish and role-play websites, connecting with strangers who shared his interests. His searches weren't just for personal gratification. They revealed a man who was slowly detaching from the life he had built with Gianna. In one online profile, Ahmed described himself as a dominant figure looking for someone submissive, someone who would follow without question. His messages revealed a fascination with control and a desire to push boundaries. It was here that Ahmed began crafting the framework for what would later become a chilling plan to remove Gianna from his life altogether. Leona, captivated by Ahmed's charm and manipulation, became an accomplice to his dark fantasies. Ahmed confided in her, painting Gianna as the obstacle to their happiness. He convinced Leona that Gianna was cold, unloving, and a hindrance to the life they both deserved. Slowly, Leona began to see herself not as the other woman, but as Ahmed's partner, a role that came with dangerous implications. Ahmed's manipulation of Leona went beyond words. He began teaching her how to shoot a gun, taking her to firing ranges under the pretense of self-defense training. Records later revealed that Ahmed purchased a Glock pistol, claiming it was for household protection. But in truth, it was another piece of the puzzle, a tool for a plan that was becoming increasingly clear. As Ahmed and Leona's relationship deepened, Gianna became more isolated. The house that had once been her sanctuary now felt like enemy territory. Ahmed and Leona's secret alliance grew stronger with every passing day, leaving Gianna unknowingly trapped in a web of betrayal, manipulation, and mounting danger. February 24th began like any other day in the quiet Washington suburb where the Richards family lived. The morning air was crisp, the neighborhood still and serene. But inside the Richards home, something far more sinister was taking shape. Ahmed Berry and Leona Villarreal had meticulously prepared for this moment. For weeks, they had plotted, rehearsing each step of their plan to ensure there would be no loose ends. Gianna Richard had no idea what was coming. That morning, Ahmed left the house early, as he often did, under the pretense of heading to work. He kissed Gianna on the cheek, his face betraying none of the turmoil beneath the surface. Unbeknownst to her, he drove a short distance and parked in a lot, waiting for the signal from Leona that everything was in place. Leona had spent the past several days laying the groundwork for the crime. Ahmed had persuaded her to contact a man named Carter Avila through an encrypted messaging app, posing as Gianna. Carter, an unsuspecting pawn, had been lured with promises of a consensual role-play encounter. According to their fabricated script, Gianna would invite him over for an intimate rendezvous involving restraints and other elements that Ahmed had suggested to make it appear consensual. As Carter arrived at the Richards' home that morning, Leona watched from an upstairs window. She had already staged the house to fit the story they planned to tell, lighting candles, setting out certain items, and making it appear as though Gianna had been waiting for Carter. When Carter entered, he called out her name, but it was silence that greeted him. Leona quickly messaged Ahmed. "He's here." Moments later, Ahmed was on his way back to the house. Inside the home, Gianna was in the master bedroom, completely unaware of Carter's presence. She was startled when he opened the door, confused and alarmed by the sight of a stranger holding a bag filled with fetish accessories. Her protests were met with bewilderment from Carter, who believed he was fulfilling her request. The room quickly descended into chaos, as Gianna tried to make sense of what was happening and Carter realized something was terribly wrong. Leona entered the room moments later, her face pale but determined. According to her later testimony, this was the point where Ahmed returned to the house. Bursting into the bedroom, he shouted, "What's going on here?" pretending to be shocked. But his actions revealed the truth. Without hesitation, Ahmed drew his firearm, a Glock 43X he had recently purchased, and fired a single shot into Carter's head. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, echoing through the house. Carter collapsed onto the floor, his body lifeless. Gianna screamed, her voice filled with terror and disbelief, But Ahmed wasn't done. He turned his attention to his wife, his face devoid of any trace of the man she had married. Leona, standing frozen near the doorway, was handed a knife by Ahmed. According to her later confession, Ahmed shouted, "Do it now! Finish it!" Terrified and under his control, Leona moved toward Gianna, who was now begging for her life. Gianna's cries filled the room as Leona hesitated, tears streaming down her face. But Ahmed's voice was relentless, barking orders until Leona finally plunged the knife into Gianna's neck. The scene was a horrifying blend of chaos and violence. Blood pooled on the floor, staining the carpet and walls. Gianna fought desperately, her hands grasping at the blade as her life ebbed away. Ahmed stood over her, his expression cold and unyielding. Leona delivered the final blows, stabbing Gianna repeatedly as Ahmed watched. By the time it was over, the room was silent except for Leona's ragged breathing. Gianna lay motionless, her body lifeless beside Carter's. Ahmed took the knife from Leona and began to clean up, trying to stage the scene to fit their narrative. He placed Carter's bag near Gianna, arranged the weapons, and instructed Leona on what to say when the police arrived. In the basement, 4-year-old Annabelle sat watching cartoons, blissfully unaware of the horrors unfolding above her. The laughter of her favorite show played in sharp contrast to the brutality upstairs. The house, once a haven for love and family, had become a scene of unspeakable violence. Ahmed and Leona's plan, however, was far from foolproof. Blood was everywhere, on the walls, the furniture, and their clothes. No amount of staging could fully mask the horror of what had transpired. Still, Ahmed was confident that the story they had rehearsed would be enough to convince the authorities. He instructed Leona to call 911, feigning panic and claiming that an intruder had attacked Gianna and Carter. Leona made the call, her voice trembling as she told the dispatcher that she and Ahmed had interrupted a violent home invasion. As the line stayed open, her words betrayed the chaos around her. When officers arrived, they were met with a scene that defied explanation. 2 lifeless bodies, a blood-soaked bedroom, and 2 suspects who claimed to be victims. The events of that morning shattered the Richards family forever. What had once been a home filled with love and laughter had become a crime scene, a place where betrayal and violence had left an indelible mark. The ripple effects of Ahmed and Leona's actions would soon spread far beyond the walls of their home, leaving friends, family, and an entire community reeling from the tragedy. The 911 call came in just after 8 a.m., reporting a violent attack inside the Richards home. Police officers arrived within minutes, their urgency heightened by the frantic tone in Leona Villarreal's voice. She had described an intruder attacking Gianna Richard and Carter Avila, claiming that she and Ahmed Berry had interrupted the assault and acted in self-defense. The scene that greeted the officers was nothing short of horrifying. Upstairs, the master bedroom was soaked in blood. Gianna's lifeless body lay sprawled on the floor, her neck and torso riddled with stab wounds. Beside her was Carter, his head and chest bearing gunshot wounds. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, and the disarray in the room hinted at a violent struggle. Leona and Ahmed were both present when the officers arrived. Ahmed, his shirt stained with blood, identified himself as a federal agent and immediately began recounting their version of events. According to him, Carter had broken into the house, attacking Gianna in a frenzied assault. He claimed to have acted on instinct, shooting Carter to protect his wife. Leona's story mirrored Ahmed's, though her trembling voice and disjointed sentences hinted at a deeper unease. She told officers that she had been outside with Annabelle when she saw Carter enter the home. After unsuccessfully trying to contact Gianna, she called Ahmed, who rushed back and confronted the intruder. Leona said she retrieved a gun from the bedroom safe, fearing for her life, and fired a single shot at Carter when she thought he was still a threat. To the responding officers, the scene was chaotic but seemed to align with the story they were being told. Ahmed and Leona were taken to the station for further questioning, leaving the blood-soaked bedroom to be processed by forensic investigators. But as the crime scene was analyzed, cracks in their story began to emerge. At the station, Leona's initial composure quickly crumbled. During a 9-hour interrogation, her narrative shifted repeatedly. Investigators noticed inconsistencies in her account, from the timeline of events to her explanation of how Carter had gained entry into the house. When pressed about her relationship with Ahmed, Leona hesitated, her body language betraying her discomfort. Meanwhile, Ahmed maintained his version of events with calm precision, though his responses raised more questions than they answered. He claimed to have acted solely in defense of his wife, yet the physical evidence suggested otherwise. The trajectory of the gunshot wounds on Carter's body didn't align with a defensive shooting. Additionally, the excessive stab wounds on Gianna pointed to an attack fueled by rage rather than self-defense. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a damning trail of evidence that painted a far different picture than the one Ahmed and Leona had presented. Phone records revealed a series of encrypted messages between Ahmed and Leona in the weeks leading up to the murder. These messages detailed their plans to lure Carter to the house, using Gianna's name to convince him of a consensual encounter. Further scrutiny of Ahmed's financial records revealed that he had purchased the Glock 43X used in the crime just weeks earlier. Surveillance footage from a local firing range showed Ahmed and Leona practicing together, further implicating her as a willing participant in the plot. This wasn't a spontaneous act of self-defense. It was a calculated, premeditated crime. Investigators also uncovered evidence of Ahmed's double life. His online profiles on fetish websites revealed his fixation on control and domination. He had used these platforms to recruit Carter, exploiting his interests and framing the encounter as a consensual scenario orchestrated by Gianna. The discovery of emails and messages between Ahmed and Leona further solidified their involvement. One message, sent just days before the murder, read, "Once this is done, we can finally be free." Leona's interrogation reached a breaking point when she was confronted with the evidence. Faced with the mounting proof of her complicity, she broke down, admitting to her affair with Ahmed and detailing the months of manipulation that had led to the crime. She confessed that Ahmed had convinced her Gianna was the obstacle to their happiness, a narrative he had carefully constructed to justify his actions. Leona claimed she had acted out of fear, saying, "He made me believe I had no choice." Ahmed, however, remained unyielding. Even as the evidence piled up, he continued to assert his innocence, blaming Carter for the violence and portraying Leona as an unstable accomplice. His attempts to deflect blame only deepened the investigators' resolve to uncover the full truth. The investigation into the murders of Gianna Richard and Carter Avila revealed a web of deceit, betrayal, and premeditated violence. Ahmed and Leona's carefully crafted facade had crumbled under the weight of the evidence, exposing the darkness that had consumed their lives. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, one thing became clear. This was not a crime of passion or desperation. It was a cold, calculated plan to destroy one life in pursuit of another. With the evidence against them mounting, Ahmed Berry and Leona Villarreal found themselves at the center of a legal battle that would captivate and horrify those who followed the case. Investigators had meticulously pieced together the events leading up to the murders of Gianna Richard and Carter Avila, leaving little doubt about the roles Ahmed and Leona played in the crime. Leona, facing the reality of her actions and the overwhelming evidence against her, agreed to a plea deal. In exchange for her cooperation and testimony against Ahmed, prosecutors reduced her charges from first-degree murder to involuntary manslaughter. Her lawyers argued that she had been manipulated by Ahmed, painting her as a victim of psychological coercion rather than a willing accomplice. The plea deal required Leona to provide a detailed account of the crime, including Ahmed's role in orchestrating the events of that fateful morning. In court, Leona's testimony was damning. She recounted how Ahmed had convinced her that Gianna was an obstacle to their happiness, describing months of manipulation and control. She admitted her role in the murders, but insisted that Ahmed had coerced her into participating, using fear and emotional dependency to keep her under his influence. Her voice trembled as she described the moment Ahmed handed her the knife and ordered her to stab Gianna. "I didn't want to do it," she told the court, "but he said I had no choice." Ahmed, on the other hand, denied all allegations of coercion or premeditation. His defense team attempted to portray him as a man who acted out of desperation, claiming he had only intended to protect his wife from an intruder. But the evidence told a different story. The encrypted messages, the staged crime scene, and Leona's testimony painted a chilling picture of a man who had meticulously planned the murders in pursuit of his own desires. After months of legal wrangling, Ahmed was indicted on multiple charges, including first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The prosecution presented a compelling case, highlighting Ahmed's affair with Leona, his online activities, and his purchase of the weapon used in the crime. In the end, the jury found Ahmed guilty on all counts, sealing his fate as the mastermind behind the horrific events that shattered two families. For the families of Gianna Richard and Carter Avila, the trial was a painful reminder of the devastating loss they had endured. Gianna's friends and relatives filled the courtroom, their faces etched with grief as they listened to the details of her final moments. During the sentencing phase, her sister addressed the court, her voice breaking as she described the impact of Gianna's death. She was the glue that held our family together. Her kindness, her laughter. It's all gone now. And for what? Because someone decided their happiness was worth more than her life. Carter's family also struggled to come to terms with his involvement in the tragedy. As the prosecution revealed how Ahmed and Leona had lured him into their plot, Carter's friends described him as an unwitting pawn, manipulated and ultimately sacrificed. One of Carter's closest friends, speaking outside the courtroom, said, "He didn't deserve this. He thought he was helping someone and they used him. They took advantage of his trust and left him to die." The emotional toll of the case extended far beyond the courtroom. Gianna's colleagues at the hospital organized a memorial in her honor, sharing stories of her selflessness and dedication. In the community where she lived, neighbors mourned the loss of a woman who had brought light to everyone around her. "She deserved so much better," one friend said. "She didn't just lose her life. She was betrayed in the worst way possible." Leona Villarreal's testimony revealed not only the details of the crime, but also the depths of her own regret. In her allocution during sentencing, she apologized to Gianna's family, her voice choked with emotion. "I can't undo what I've done," she said. "I live with the weight of it every single day. I was weak. I let someone manipulate me, and because of that, lives were destroyed. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Despite her apologies, opinions on Leona remained divided. Some saw her as a victim of Ahmed's control, a young woman who had been led astray by a man she trusted. Others viewed her as equally culpable, arguing that she had opportunities to walk away but chose instead to participate in the crime. The court ultimately sentenced her to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years. For many, the sentence felt too lenient, a slap on the wrist for someone who had played a direct role in two brutal murders. In the months following her conviction, Leona spoke out from prison, participating in interviews where she reflected on her actions and the consequences of her choices. She described her relationship with Ahmed as toxic, admitting that she had ignored warning signs and allowed herself to be drawn into his orbit. "I thought he loved me," she said in one interview. "But looking back, I realize he only loved control." Leona's words, though poignant, offered little solace to the families of Gianna and Carter. For them, the damage was irreversible, and the scars left by Ahmed and Leona's actions would never fully heal. Though justice was served, the aftermath of the crime left an indelible mark on everyone it touched. Gianna's legacy lived on through the memories of those who loved her, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of betrayal. And for Ahmed and Leona, their choices ensured that their lives, once full of promise, would be defined by the tragedy they had created. The story of Gianna Richard, Ahmed Berry, and Leona Villarreal is one that leaves a deep scar. It's a chilling reminder of how betrayal, manipulation, and unchecked desires can unravel lives in unimaginable ways. Gianna was a woman who gave so much of herself, to her family, her patients, and her community. Her life, filled with promise and love, was cruelly stolen in a moment of unthinkable violence. For Annabelle, the daughter Gianna adored, the impact is immeasurable. A little girl who once ran through the backyard with laughter now faces a future shaped by loss. She will grow up carrying the weight of her family's tragedy, her memories of her mother blurred by time and pain. The ripple effects of this crime extend far beyond the Richards' home, touching everyone who knew and loved Gianna, and even those who only knew of her. Equally haunting is the story of Carter Avila, a man drawn into a web of lies and deceit. His life was cut short not because of his own choices, but because of the selfish actions of others. His death stands as a reminder of how easily trust can be exploited, how quickly innocence can be turned into a pawn in someone else's game. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. How far can betrayal go before it leads to irreparable tragedy? How do moments of weakness or selfishness spiral into acts of violence that destroy so many lives? And at what point do we become complicit, allowing ourselves to be led down a path we know is wrong? These are questions we must grapple with, not just in this story but in the choices we make every day. The story of the Richards family serves as a stark warning. Secrets don't just break hearts, they can shatter lives. Trust, once broken, can lead to consequences so severe they ripple through generations. Gianna, Carter, and even Annabelle deserved better than the chaos and destruction left in the wake of this tragedy. And yet, here we are, piecing together the fragments of a story that could have been so different if only trust had been honored. As you reflect on this case, we encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think could have been done differently? How do we prevent tragedies like this from happening in the future? Your voice matters, and your perspective could shed light on the human side of these stories. If you found this documentary thought-provoking, consider subscribing to our channel. By doing so, you'll join a community of viewers who seek to uncover the truths behind stories like these, stories that remind us of the fragility of trust and the depths of human emotion. And don't forget to share this video with others who might be moved by this heartbreaking tale. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next documentary.